Well, good evening. I am delighted to welcome you to the School of International Service. I am Rachel Robinson, and I am the interim dean, as well as a professor in the Department of Environment, Development, and Health. And I'd like to welcome you also on behalf of the Ignatius family to the 9th annual Nancy Weiser Ignatius Lecture on the Environment. Our special thanks to all of the Ignatius family for their support of this event, and to David, who is sitting here in the front, for joining us. This lecture, though, is the first one where David, Addie, and Sarah's father, and Nancy's husband, Paul Ignatius, is not with us. And for those of you who have attended the lecture before, you will remember Paul being here. Paul passed away in November, aged 104, and I was just reminded, just days shy of being 105. And it's very special to be in the presence of a centenarian. It's not something that we get to do very often. He was a Navy combat veteran of World War II, who later served in the Defense Department in the Kennedy administration, and then for President Lyndon B. Johnson. And he led a life of exemplary service, receiving numerous distinguished awards and honors. Over the years, he faithfully attended each of these lectures and enjoyed engaging with the guest speakers. So we dedicate this lecture in particular to the memory of both Paul and Nan. Before I introduce you to tonight's speaker, I do want to take a moment to honor the life and legacy of Nancy Weiser Ignatius, a beloved alumna of our school. So Nan, as she was affectionately known, earned her master's degree in international affairs from SIS in 1969. So the school was just 12 years old at that time, and was a dedicated member of the SIS alumni community until her passing in 2019. And we have a copy of her memoir, Still Wondering, that I keep on the shelf with all of the alumni books in the dean's office. And then there's wonderful pictures inside if anybody wants to look at it, but including one of her graduating from AU, as well as many other wonderful pictures of the family. So Nan was a pioneering activist who championed environmental causes long before they became mainstream practices. In the 1970s, she co-founded Concern Incorporated, an all-female volunteer organization that informed and empowered consumers to make environmentally conscious shopping decisions. Through its advocacy, manufacturers felt the pressure to adopt more sustainable product packaging practices. Nan followed this success with her work at the Department of Energy, where she launched the first solar energy exhibit in 1976 on a section of the National Mall, and there's a picture of that in the book too. Later, she worked for the Environmental Protection Agency. In addition to her environmental advocacy, Nan was deeply involved in the Washington National Cathedral, where the Nancy and Paul Ignatius program was established to honor the couple's lifetime of service, as well as their personal commitment to exploring and addressing humanity's most challenging questions. Nan's life exemplified the ideals of service that are central to the mission of SIS, and in a way that demonstrates that there's so many different ways to embody that mission of service. And it's really special to be here tonight and to be inspired by that. Her legacy lives on with her family and in the continuing impact of her work in environmental activism. So with thanks to the generosity of the Ignatius family, we've hosted senior policymakers and leaders in the nonprofit, public, and private sectors who work tirelessly to address environmental challenges around the world. Tonight's guest is no exception. But first, allow me to introduce the chair of the SIS Department of Environment, Development, and Health, Lauren Carruth, Professor Lauren Carruth, who will lead our discussion later. Lauren is a medical anthropologist specializing in humanitarian assistance, global health, nutrition, displacement, migration, and the Horn of Africa. Prior to American University, she was a postdoctoral scholar at Princeton in the Global Health and Health Policy program, and at another university down the hill in the Elliott School of International Affairs. Between 2002 and 2007, she worked for the UN World Food Program in Ethiopia, UNICEF in Ethiopia, and the Feinstein International Center at Tufts. And I'll just give her a shout out because she told me that she submitted the final corrections to her book proofs last night. So, yes. And now to our guest, who is also about to have a celebratory book launching. So Dr. Catherine Wilkinson. Catherine is a writer and teacher who has inspired hundreds of thousands of climate journeys and shifted our cultural narrative on what is possible. Her publications include the hot off the press Climate Wayfinding, available for sale today after the lecture, and the best-selling anthology All We Can Save, the podcast A Matter of Degrees, and the New York Times bestseller Drawdown. Catherine co-founded and leads the All We Can project, where she shaped the much-loved All We Can Save circles and climate wayfinding projects. She has a TED Talk with more than 2 million views. Catherine holds a DPhil in Geography and Environment from the University of Oxford, where she was a Rhodes Scholar, and a BA in Religion from Sewanee, the University of the South. In 2019, Time magazine named her one of the 15 women who will save the world. And then maybe we can have a conversation about the gendered fact of women needing to save the world. But anyway, that was all I could think of when I saw that. Sorry, side commentary. So please join me in welcoming Catherine Wilkinson to the podium.
Also, thank goodness there are millions more than 15 women, and not only women, who are trying to save the world. It is such a joy to be here. Thank you all, and everyone who touched this lecture and planning. It's so nice to be on this campus. And I did not know about Nan's love of questions, but this feels very, I don't know, kismet, because this is really a book about questions and how we hold them and work with them in generative ways. And in fact, this book is so hot off the press that it's not technically off the press yet. It technically comes out on May 5th, so we got very special permission from my publisher to have early copies available here, which is a real treat. It also means this is the first time I've done this talk, so we'll be in it together. We're gonna try a few things tonight that hopefully you'll be game for, and if they flop, you can give me constructive feedback. But we're gonna begin with a story.
It is no small thing to be human on Earth. Here, on this ground, under these skies, we are home. So when the climate shifts and the places we love are hurting, it feels personal. We feel the tug to do something, but there are so many paths and so many saying, act now, do more, be better. The heat, the seas, the losses are rising, time is running out. Pause. Let's take a breath. Urgency and overwhelm keep us stuck. We don't need more information. We need orientation. A practice to find true north within the swirl. That's climate wayfinding. It begins with the questions we hold. What is mine to do? Where do I belong? What path is worthy, no matter how rocky it gets? We look inward with care to follow our emotions and offer our superpowers. We look outward with curiosity to surface solutions and connect with community. And then we look forward, not with certainty, but courage, to orient with vision and journey onward with a clear compass. Each of us is a node of possibility. Whoever we are, whatever we've got to give. And when one connects to another, nodes become networks. Scattered concern becomes shared direction. And we realize, I am not too small. I am not too late. I am an essential part of Earth's abundance. And when we find our place within it, the healing begins.
Little sweet dot trying to find their way. And that is a sweet story of a sweet dot. But many of us are experiencing something similar, that we are increasingly navigating a world where our maps aren't working. And I'm just going to read a short passage from the first chapter of the book called Embarking. In a very literal sense, we find ourselves facing a world where maps increasingly no longer work. Our physical world is changing with such rapidity that efforts to document it are almost always out of date. From road maps to planting schedules in the Farmer's Almanac to passed down knowledge, the records we have used to plan, steer, and respond to conditions, they all feel less and less reliable. Have we logged the latest mudslide, algal bloom, oil spill, or refinery discharge? Is it safe to take that road, swim that lake, fish that bay, or breathe that air? Is that grassland or glacier still there? What are the edges of water, of land, of high temps and low, of safe and sure? The gap between what is on paper or screen and what we encounter in 3 dimensions can be startling, distressing, and also dangerous. We are feeling our way through the obscure, a word that comes from the Latin for dark. As we traverse, our internal maps are failing us too. Where to live, what work to do, who to love, what matters most. These queries press amid the commotion of change that is global in scope, yet intimately local in consequence. They seem to outstrip many of our inherited answers, and efforts to track our own deepest knowing may come up murky and muddled. With home so very much in question, as flux comes to neighborhoods, ecosystems, and entire countries, how can we not lose our bearings? In fact, if we feel we have clear coordinates on life, we may not have truly reckoned with what's afoot and the material conditions that will shape every path from here. For meaning-seeking beings, this time of climate crisis and ecological unraveling is clarifying. If we are looking for something worthy of our waking hours, surely the work of mending our planet is it. The continuance of life itself seems a rather consequential mission, personally, communally, and for society as a whole. But in other ways, this moment is wholly confounding. To be so small in the face of something so big is disorienting. And of course, I'm focused in this book on climate, but you add in the swift currents of democracy and all that's happening with its unraveling and hopefully reweaving, technological change, it's a lot. The very ground underfoot feels unsteady, and sometimes that is quite literally true. And I have personally known the navigational challenges of what it means to be a human on Earth back from the very beginnings of my days. These are some artifacts, let's say, from the very beginning of my own climate journey. I was sharing with Lauren that I spent a semester in high school at a place called the Outdoor Academy in Western North Carolina, living in the woods with 25 kids, sometimes hanging out with goats, reading Mary Oliver's poetry, and also having some of my first encounters with real ecological loss. In particular, I have a very vivid memory of hiking up through a beautiful remote section of Pisgah National Forest and out onto a totally denuded ridgeside into a fresh, clear cut. And in that time there, this calling started to stir in me. This was a haiku that I wrote in my hand-bound journal at the time. Want to help the world, be connected with the earth, change the way I live. And that felt very clear, and what on earth that would possibly mean felt utterly unknown. And I think that is often the paradox of calling, that we experience this certainty and uncertainty in the very same breath. So for the last now 27 years and counting, I've been navigating my own crossroads in climate, certainly more than one dead end, and often seeking spaces for sense-making, support for how do I orient, where do I go, space to hold grief, and often coming up short on where those spaces were. And typically I was finding them outside of what we might call the environmental movement or the climate community. And I know I'm not alone in that by a long shot. And I hear the very navigational challenges that we're holding as human beings in the questions that we ask. Is there hope? Is something that people kind of grab you over to a corner during a party if you're a climate person and ask you. And of course, this persistent drumbeat question, what can I do? I think of these questions as something like the fruiting body, to use a fungal metaphor, of deeper, bigger wonderings that we are often holding and don't have space to ask. And our conventional response as, environmental thinkers and doers is to give people a punch list. Here are the things you can do, you good, awake human who wants to be helpful. And I don't think those punch lists are working because we see this very persistent gap between concern and action. It's kind of a miracle that now a majority of people are worried about the climate crisis, want to see more action from governments, and almost all of them are sitting on the sidelines. So we haven't been answering this question well, and we've been answering it, I think, in ways that fundamentally shortchange us as those nodes of possibility who can do more than ride a bike and go vote and attend a protest and, right? Like, we have these greater capacities to offer. But how do we get there? I think that this is a fundamental question of strategy for a social movement. How do we tend the people that are making all of the other solutions possible? How do we see human beings as nature-based solutions, right? How do we think about participation and engagement, not just in one-off ways, but for the long haul? Because we've got tons of burnout. We've got people piecing out of this work because it's too hard. We are a movement under duress. We have got to take care of the people who are in it. And that has become really the core of my work. But I found myself thinking about this question in the quiet, hunkered down days of 2020, and more time for journaling and free writing. I finally took up morning pages for anyone in the room who's a fan of The Artist's Way. And lo and behold, some useful things came out on those legal pads. And I found myself writing about, how can we answer this question in better ways? And what had I done in my own life to answer this question? And what I realized was that it wasn't about answers, it was about a series of practices for working with this question again and again and again and again. And that free writing became a piece for Time magazine, which was great, but let's be honest, you read an article and then nobody actually does any of the things that the article suggests. So I thought, well, what if this was actually a learning journey? What if this was a program that people could move through in community and do some of that working with the questions? So in 2022, we started to build a program to do just that at the All We Can Save project. And we decided we would call it Climate Wayfinding. And the name has clearly stuck. We ran a number of pilot cohorts in 2022, and we started to see these sorts of shifts from the feelings of overwhelm, of isolation, maybe of downright depression, certainly doubt, a lot of ache, heaps of burnout, lots of wondering, to a sense of clarity, connection, possibility, action, renewal, forward movement towards footholds. We even have we have at least one pilot participant in the room, so I can be held accountable for any of these claims. And we heard people saying things like, this experience turned my grief into love, my rage into joy, and my anxiety into hope. So we were like, great, but we are a tiny, tiny, tiny nonprofit. So how do we do anything meaningful with this program, given how big the need is? And so we started to train facilitators. In 2024, we trained we've now trained almost 100 educators from more than 75 colleges and universities. And it's so lovely. We do it on retreat, which is just the best. It's like summer camp, but climate-y. You can tell there's drawing and all sorts of fun things, lots of feasting. This is one of the cohorts of facilitators who are now starting to bring this climate wayfinding program to their campuses. One of our facilitators just finished a retreat model program at Ithaca College, and one of the students said, "I think I learned more about climate change in 3 days than I have in 3 years," which is pretty cool. And we're seeing similar shifts for participants. But again, even with all of these wonderful facilitators trained, there's still so much more need. And certainly there's a lot of need, not just for people who are students, but for people of all career stages, ages, and more. And so the question still for us was, how do we meet that need? And I sort of had a hand on the forehead, like, duh moment, which is that I make books often. And I'd written a series of essays to frame the program, which have become the core through line in this book. But that it wouldn't just be a book that would talk to you. I have worked on plenty of those, but it would be a book that would actually walk with you. So alongside essays, there are journal prompts, there are guided meditations, there are creative mapping exercises, there are reading group agendas. We ended up weaving in really beautiful, what we call lighting the way stories from a host of really just incredibly wise, incredibly dogged leaders in the space. And of course, poetry. I love poetry. It's been part of my climate journey from the jump. And what makes us more porous, really, than reading a poem and finding ways to articulate the things that are unsayable and help us hold the questions. And then the book itself actually does begin with questions, as does the program. Not as things that we need to solve, but as companions on the journey. And in some ways, the very things that can help us get our bearings in this murky, shifting time. And we use a 3-part approach that's pretty simple. It's about looking inward with care, looking outward with curiosity, and looking forward with courage. And we need all 3 of these. I think of them kind of as working in some kind of cool kaleidoscope, that as you keep turning, you actually are able to see more clearly the path ahead. So I want to unpack a little bit about what this means in the context of climate wayfinding and give you just the tiniest little taste. It's hard to bring something from a 5-day retreat into a lecture experience, but we're going to give it a go. And in all of this, I hope that it is an invitation to notice the navigational capacities that we already have access to, but we may not be consciously tapping into them day to day. So looking inward with care, in part, this is about those often distressing, often difficult emotions that we feel about the climate crisis. It tends to come with it some really big feelings, and in particular for young people, we know that almost half of young people around the world are finding that their feelings about the climate crisis are impacting their day-to-day life and functioning. And those are feelings of grief, of anger, of a sense of betrayal, a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, and it's a lot to be with those every day. But as Sherry Mitchell, whose photo you saw, teaches, the feelings that we have are not something wrong with us, but something being righted within us. And so we begin by looking to those emotions and following them in terms of what do they have to say, what do they have to teach, what fuel can they offer if we work with them consciously and with support. But it's not all heaviness, this looking inward with care. It is also about our superpowers. It's about the ways that we embody life force in our own unique ways. And we do that in climate wayfinding through, I think, a pretty fun combo of power and joy. Power is not the kind of power we think about a lot of times in Washington, D.C., not hierarchical power, not positional power, but a sense of that kind of inner fire in the belly rising up within us. And joy, I think, is probably pretty obvious, but that feeling of the sort of like resonant golden thing, that can happen. And where those two come together, I think that's probably the best approximation, at least that I have landed, for what life force is and feels like. And so we use these lenses of power and joy to do some of that discernment around the gifts that we have to offer and might boldly claim in this time. A lot of times I think we go down a pretty heady path about like, what are my talents and what are my skill sets? And, that's all wonderful and I think has a role to play. But I think there can be deeper discernment that we're able to come through reflection and somatic practice. And in particular, this has been incredibly helpful for people who thought, I don't have anything to offer to climate action or to the climate community. So we're going to do a tiny, tiny practice of this together. If you are comfortable, you can close your eyes if you'd like to just soften your gaze or just keep your eyes open. Any is fine. And if you need to just do a little, perhaps wiggle or reorg to get even more comfortable and supported in your seat. And let's just take a generous breath together. And as you breathe, just notice the firmness of earth beneath you. Imagine your body filling up with a sense of authentic inner power, capacity, ability, energy, strength, weight. How does that feel in your body? Are there sensations that you notice? How does power shape you physically? And welcome into your mind doing or experiencing something that gives you that sense of authentic power. And just feel that in your body. Now let's welcome in the embodied feeling of deep, resonant joy. Imagine your body full of delight, happiness, exhilaration, maybe even bliss. How does joy shape you? Are there any sensations that come with joy? And welcome into your mind doing something, experiencing something that gives you that deep sense of joy. And just notice. Take another generous breath in and out. And staying anchored in whatever embodied sensations you have, you can refocus or open your eyes. And if you'd like to jot a few things down, you're welcome to, or just reflect for a moment on what arose for you around power and joy. Maybe words, images, sensations, little snippets perhaps that came up. When we do a fuller exploration of these ideas and experiences of power and joy, what we find is that it becomes a really potent portal to the gifts that we want to offer in this time of immense trouble and yet also immense possibility. There are things that come onto, we do these big sort of maps of power and joy. There are things that come onto the page that people think, that has nothing to do with climate change. And sometimes those are the very things that create an opening. Sometimes they do truly have nothing to do with climate change, and they are simply things that can help us stay healthy and invigorated and in touch with life as we do what is often really hard work. So just notice the orienting power of turning from the question, what can I do, to who can I be in this work? And coming from those sources of power and joy. It's not enough to look inward, of course. We also look outward, and we do it with curiosity. And that's a very intentional word, because oftentimes when we are kind of tuning into the external landscape, we come with our analyst hats on first and foremost, which have a really important role to play. We want to make sure that the things we might do could genuinely meaningfully help, right? We don't want to spend our time sort of chasing after false solutions. But the set of solutions is so big and so broad that that orientation often comes up short as a means for filtering and honing to where we might fit in, the solutions that we might pull out of the toolbox. So there's a sense of overwhelm, I think, about the very many possibilities of the solutions we could engage with. So we invite in the spirit of the artist as much as the analyst, a sense of what do we want to be in creative relationship with? Where is our energy taking us? Our sense of wonder, where is that steering us next? We also think about our unique ecosystems, both literal ecosystems, but also our metaphorical ecosystems of the many contexts that we operate within and the communities that we are a part of. Because when facing a planetary crisis, a lot like a personal one, we do not want to go it alone. And so building a relational web is an essential part of this work. It is why there are gather agendas at the end of every chapter in the book. And we are in Kindred Community right now, so we don't want to miss the opportunity to just honor that and relish that in a tiny, tiny way. So I'm going to invite you to turn to someone you're sitting near. Maybe ideally it's someone you don't know. We're going to do something radical and say hi, share your name, and then look each other in the eye and just say, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here. And then we'll repeat that a couple times. And pause. And pause. And pause. And if you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. Amazing. Well, it's pretty nice to just be in community for a minute. That was sweet. Good? Yeah? Good. And then the third piece of this framework is about looking forward with courage, not with certainty, which I think is really important. In part, this is about tapping into the orienting power of vision, about inviting our imaginative wisdom to cast forward, not only to the world that we want, but to where we might fit into it, to see feelingly, right, the possible futures that are ahead. It's also about honing a compass, which we do very tactically in climate wayfinding. We use this compass as a synthesis tool because we go down all of these brilliant, wonderful, fabulous, and divergent paths of exploration. And then there's the task of trying to weave it together into something that can continue to support and help and steer as we go forward. But I'm not just talking about the power of a framework, a compass framework. It's also about tuning into the compass that we are, not just the compass that we hold. And this is one of the things that I think is most hopeful, is that in our very bodies, in the very wiring of our brains, we are equipped for wayfinding. We are equipped for navigation. We are equipped for orientation. The little maps in our phones are rapidly thieving us of that. But there is an arrow within us that is pointing towards a true north. And so we're going to step into a little of that like courageous arrow pointingness in ourselves. So if you're able, come to standing. And tap back into that feeling of power and joy and maybe the knowingness that you felt around those things. And on the count of 3, we're going to each do a body posture or a movement, whatever it is for you, that expresses your sense of power and joy and directed life force. Don't think too much about it. Just like let the body lead. worst case scenario, this is like a bad group photo, okay? So 3, 2, 1. That's pretty good. Let's do one more. One more. With vigor, with vigor. Make a noise if you want to. 3, 2, 1. That was great. You can sit back down. In all seriousness, I do think that the ways we can take ourselves into that embodied knowing through something as simple as a posture or a small movement is actually something that we can return to again and again as we try to suss out those next footholds for action in our personal lives, in our professional lives, our educational lives, and in this very fragile, very potent shared public life that we have. And to notice again, just the orienting power that is right there in our flesh and bones. So this is just like the tiniest, barely an hors d'oeuvre taste of climate wayfinding. And of course, climate wayfinding is much bigger than a retreat. It is bigger than a book. It is a lifelong process for anyone who has arrived on Earth at this time. The world keeps changing, we keep evolving, new questions arise, we are still wondering. In this liminal time, we constantly find ourselves back at the crossroads and trying to suss again which way to now turn. And I found myself in very deep waters, actually, of navigation, smack in the 3 months that I took off to focus on this book. And exactly 1 month in, my dad died. And it was the end of a long and really hard journey with Alzheimer's. And I think he would have actually gotten quite a kick out of finding his way into a climate book, because he was very much not a nature guy. But I found myself with a raft of new wonderings in the aftermath of his passing. So I'm going to read just a section from the end of the book, and then we'll have some conversation. The simple math of what needs to be done to slow the breaching and bring us back into some kind of balance on Earth is mind-boggling. I close my eyes and feel a throbbing at my brow. We will need the kinetic power of enormous, elegant wind turbines and solar power from the transfiguration of light. We will need the legislative power of governments and the informational power of media. We will need people power, as abiding and tenacious as dandelions. But I think we will need power from yet another dimension if we want to do what needs doing and get where we need to go. The planet has boundaries, yet circuits with something so very boundless, too. Almost exactly 48 hours after my father died, I woke up in the night, quick and lucid. Right above my chest, I felt pulsing, porous energy, like sequins catching light, only a sensation rather than something seen. It was nothing I've ever experienced before, yet somehow so familiar. It was, as best as I can describe, the feeling of my dad's sheer and absolute love, which he gave with such ease. The rawness and great enigma of death may let us touch into the reality of love that is so much bigger than a body. It flows in a kind of malleable, connective lattice work, a gauzy webbing that is as present, suffusing, and necessary as air, and equally invisible. I cannot possibly prove it, but I know we are all caught in Earth's net of unstinting, unequivocal love. Our deepest belonging sources from it, our deepest learning resides there, and our deepest invitation is to participate in the exchange. I long for climate healing motivated not from wanting to fix something, but from wanting to love something. Beneath or beyond my throbbing mind, I notice a quivering desire. I want to be part of the humming heartbeat of Earth, as long as I am able. When my own inner rhythm stops, I want to know that I was a sequin on the golden skirt of life's dance. I played my part in the shimmy and the shimmer, even as the world lurched. And the lurches of the world right now feel to me almost unbearable some days. And what are we to do except to continue to play our part, both as those individual nodes of possibility connected together in this extraordinary web, and be part of that persistent shimmer of life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Thanks, everybody, for being here today. I am so lucky because I got an early copy of the book. I've been diving into it this last week. And I have so many questions and so many things I want to talk about, I think. And the first, and it's interesting because I didn't know what you were going to talk about either. So I'm a department chair here. And you know, we have lots of students applying to come to our programs, come to our school. And it's interesting, I just read 24 applications of people wanting to go into global environmental policy, for example. And a lot of
Courageous
right,
humans.
Right, courageous people. But they're also coming from a place of experiencing trauma and disaster. And it's very real for them. You know, there are people whose houses were inundated during Hurricane Helene, for example, in Western North Carolina. And, you know, there's someone we know in the department who had felt very personally the effects of poverty and violence. And this has made them motivated to come here. And so, you know, one of the things I think that is implicit in this is a real vulnerability. You mentioned porousness, like opening yourself to the world, like we were asked to close our eyes and feel it all. But that can be really scary right now. I know I've turned to more escapism in the last year than ever before. And so I'm wondering sort of how you've dealt with that. And I want to give you all a sense of what Catherine talks about in the book. And you actually say on page 55, there's a lot about heartbreak, not just grief in this. And I think it's about more than losing individuals. It's also about these larger world griefs. And she says that this is what I've learned most of all about a broken, open heart. So not just a broken heart. It's awake and alive, and it calls for action. With a broken, open heart, I'm not stuck in grief or any other difficult emotion swirling around me. I can access compassion, daring, and zeal. I can hold the simultaneous truths of destruction and possibility, tuning into the movements, real leadership, and true solutions that are rising. I can return to awe and reverence I feel for this magnificent planet and the ferocious love that lives at my core. And I really appreciated that, I think, and I was just hoping that our students get to have a sense of that. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to it. How is wayfinding, how is the compass affected by trauma and disaster? And I'm sure a lot of the people in the book have felt that too. And how do they find their way out of it? How do they locate the ferocious love again?
Thank you for that. Yeah, we're in, you know, it would be interesting even to see that research I mentioned about climate emotions and young people. It's a few years old now, and just in those intervening years, the likelihood that people have experienced firsthand climate impacts and firsthand climate trauma of some kind, right? It just keeps ticking up. So something that was, you know, I think probably when the terms eco-anxiety first came into use, we were talking primarily about anticipatory things, right? Not lived experiences. And as the crisis grows and as so many more communities find themselves on the front lines in some way, shape, or form, it just gets harder, right? And I think more necessary that we build emotional supports into all of this work, even when the work is not about mental health, right? Like, this is not just the realm of climate psychology and practitioners, right? This is about how all of us, I think, grow our capacity to hold space for all the things that are swirling inside us. And what I just get reminded of every time we run a climate wayfinding program, what we're hearing from our facilitators is that we're so deeply capable of giving each other what we need, right? We need mental health professionals in this, but there are not enough mental health professionals to go around. So we actually need these peer-to-peer, heart-forward, compassionate spaces of generous listening, trauma-informed, and sometimes there's something that may come up that is beyond what that space can hold. And part of it is being prepared to say, this is beyond what we can hold here, and let me point you to some professional resources, but to not be scared, right, of making that space. And I think one of the points that's so important, Lauren, and we talk about this in our facilitator training, is knowing that in a classroom, for example, you are likely to have a wide range of firsthand experiences with climate impacts. Acknowledging that, honoring that, and also being really, really clear that there is no right way to feel in this. That if you are not feeling hope, that is totally fine, right? Because if we just try to quiet the distressing emotions as little inconvenient gremlins, I think we shortchange ourselves. Certainly we shortchange our own well-being day to day, but we also shortchange our capacities as, thinkers and doers. We're also feelers, right? And so we have to be, I think, honoring all of those. We don't get the best of our heads and our hands without having our hearts in the mix.
Agreed. You talk about in the book sort of, I'll say again on page 8 to 9, I'm going to cite my source, that if we're going to do this, if we're going to build this, what you call a nexus of distress and dreaming, that we need contemplative collective spaces to reflect, make sense, and move together. And yet, more than ever, we seem to lack them. And I think I feel a little responsible because here we sit, in this beautiful building, on this beautiful campus. You say classrooms are a place to turn, but we may find that most are ill-equipped for our more than intellectual needs. So here's the question is, what is your advice to us here on campus? How can we build or retrofit, as you call it, how do we retrofit more spaces for holding these big questions in these contemplative spaces? What do we need to do with our classrooms and universities?
Thank you for that question. And I think this, my perspective on this really does come out. I'm a sort of recovering social scientist in part, one of the many hats I've worn. And, when we look at the history of social movements, we think about these big, visible, splashy moments, right? We think about the marches from Selma to Montgomery. We think about Zuccotti Park. We think about, the Women's March. We often overlook those often small, quiet, sometimes fairly invisible spaces that are the human infrastructure that is so needed for those big moments to be possible. Right? So I think about, consciousness raising in living rooms in the feminist movement long before any demands were put before legislatures. I am from Atlanta, I think a lot about the role of the Black church in the civil rights movement, right? As a space for community building, for renewal, for dreaming, for grieving, for shoring back up. Places like the Highlander Folk School. There's a story in the book about the class of law students in Fiji who were totally distressed about the limits of what national policy can do and said, we're going to take the world's biggest problem to the world's highest court. Politically impossible, everyone said. And then you all know how things turned out at the International Court of Justice, perhaps the biggest climate win of the last 3 years. I think what it means is for all of us that are shepherding teams, cultivating leadership, building community in the classroom, I think it means first just like head nodding to that challenge. And then also being willing to say, like, I think I could grow some skills to better meet the need. Very few of the facilitators that have trained with us came in having held any kind of comparable space, and yet came out feeling like, I can see how I could take this and bring it into the classroom or bring it onto campus or bring it into community. I'm also, part of the theory of change of this book is that like reading groups are capable of doing this for each other. So there is a self-led group journey that's built right into this book. Because I do, again, I think we can do it. I think we just have to do it. Do you know what I mean? Like we have to have the intention. We have to be willing to make the space, tap into some structures of support, and like skill up just a little bit. But it's not like, when you think about the climate crisis, some of the solutions are actual rocket science. But this part isn't. Like, blessedly, it's not. We can do it.
So what's your advice in bringing people into the movement, bringing them in, giving them a compass when, they are people in the hierarchical, traditional financial halls of power, and people who potentially disagree or wouldn't align with progressive climate movement folks? How do you bring them into this conversation too?
We have not had a pilot cohort of non-committed climate people. It would be really fun to try to cultivate one. The truth is, in the work that I do, it is really focused on people who are already like, I get that there's a problem. I may be a grizzled climate veteran and I am really fried and not sure I can keep doing this. Or I'm someone who's spent maybe half of a career in an adjacent space, but I want to figure out how to contribute. Or folks who are just like, we've had participants who are like, I had a kid and oh my word. And I can go to lobby days and I can show up to protests, and that doesn't feel like I'm making my deepest contribution. I got to figure out what it is. So I'll just caveat that is a lot of what I think about. But I think that some of the approaches of climate wayfinding that get us out of slinging facts at each other and into more generous human conversation about where is home and what do we care about and who do we love. Like, I think when we can come into those kinds of conversations, we find openings that we might not otherwise be able to. When we come into the space of like our values and what we hold most precious and dear, those may be very different things, but we may be able to find convergence there where if the entry point is a piece of legislation, it's not perhaps going to happen. I don't know. I'm like, we've tried the slinging facts and we've tried the debates and we've tried the charts and graphs and, we've tried a lot of it. But I think this was actually sort of shocking to me when my partner said this. He was like, the thing that will make you not want to be part of the climate movement is to have a firsthand look at the climate movement. That like we actually have to make this an inviting, compelling, welcoming place to be. Man, yeah.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I thought of when reading was you're from Atlanta, Georgia, and a lot, and you went to Sewanee and lived in Tennessee for a while. And one group that was very substantial early in the climate movement were evangelical Christians. Yeah. And
Did you know this about me? That this is what I did my PhD research on?
yeah.
Oh, you did. Oh,
you.
great. Okay, great. Yeah.
Challenging, like, but where are they now? Like where, and it seems that there's been a divergence. And how do we bring back people who may have? I think this has the potential, but yeah.
Yeah, I think, this was in 2006, 2007, when I was doing the bulk of this research, and I was going to evangelical churches across the Southeast, having conversations with people about climate change, and using a document that had recently been released at the time that was sort of a manifesto from a group called the Evangelical Climate Initiative that launched with a full-page ad in the New York Times that said, "Our commitment to Jesus Christ compels us to solve the global warming crisis." I was like, what? What is this? Where did this come from? What's happening? A couple things sort of fizzled out around that. One is that there were some real shifts among kind of the highest tier of leadership in that community, but it had not been embedded in seminaries, in congregations. It was a very sort of top down or just grass tops only, maybe, sort of thing that was happening. And even in those years, you started to see the way that theology was just kind of chopped off at the neck by growing partisanship around the issue. And I think that's the really tough thing. And so there are still efforts within evangelical Christianity around climate, but a lot of it has shifted towards a more kind of politically palatable focus on creation care, which I think is maybe a good strategy. I don't know. But I think that getting out of the, I don't know, for most people, getting out of the like heady global this player and that player and the other player, like, you know, you can understand why people are like, I can't deal with this. But into that more, I don't know, pastoral perhaps space that I think actually religion can sometimes be good at holding. I don't have any, I think I'm not the person really to advise on what the evangelical community should do, but yeah, I'd love to see a
I think
resurgence
you actually have
of
a
that.
lot of ideas about what, yeah,
Thanks.
very well informed. So I want to turn it over to question and answer. I imagine there are some folks in the audience who would like to ask some questions. I will take two at a time if that's okay. 2 or 3 at a time. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah. Hi. And by the way, introduce yourself. We're going to go take a couple and then we'll let you answer.
Hi, my name's Sophia. I'm a freshman here at AU, and I actually am interested in environmental policy.
Amazing.
Thank you. But sort of on the similar lines of what you just talked about, with your background in religion, how do you think that has helped you or just in climate wayfinding? And how do those kind of connect? And do they, or do you see that happening in the future, et cetera?
I saw one here. Oh, thanks. Oh, there are microphones. Sorry, there are microphones around here.
You can just go up to either side of the room. We have a mic if you want.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
It works. Hi, Catherine. I'm trying to think of the questions because I kind of wanted to quote every sentence. So I was writing. I'm going to read, obviously. Well, I had a couple of thoughts. One was just on what you said earlier. I think classrooms are a space where we can have this sort of relational web weaving. We have talked about this. I was part of that pilot for higher ed because at the time I was teaching as an adjunct at George Washington University in environmental justice. I think it's harder in lecture, but in seminar format or smaller group classrooms, I think you can totally bring in the everything that Catherine was talking about, ideally with the book. I taught with All We Can Save. It was a text in my class for most semesters. I tended to teach seniors who were undergrads, and I gave each of them, I brought a couple of bouquets. I asked them to dress up for their presentations. They did. I gave them, had them choose flowers after their presentations. I would give them little notes to write love notes to themselves because I had a daughter who I would put these notes in her lunch. But there's 100 little ways you can bring some of this in. So I would not discount classrooms at all, because each of us has a teacher in school, in college, in grad school who inspired us. So professors and teachers are the solution, or are a solution. But Catherine, I know you're doing this exciting book event celebration right now. What do you see as next after that? There's so much of this web weaving to do. You all at All We Can Save do an amazing job. But what's next for you personally and for this?
Sophia, I'll start with your question. I think the things that drew me to the study of religion are very present in this work, about the role of values and beliefs, about the weaving of community, about the shared stories that we tell about ourselves and this planet, and what is possible or not possible, or is important or not important. One of the other books that I read in high school that I hadn't thought about for a long time was Daniel Quinn's Ishmael, that I think probably also, seeded some of those things. And there are, aspects of the book that very explicitly go into the realm of religion. I'm thinking in particular about the Lighting the Way story from the chapter on following our emotions is focused on Sister True Dedication, who's a monastic with Plum Village, who I've been lucky to get to practice a little bit with, and I think she has so much to teach us, and that tradition, I think, has so much to teach us about being in and with the difficulty of this time without losing our attunement to joy and the wonder of it all. That's a couple of thoughts there. Nama. Well, you're asking $1 million question, really, and yeah, no. Yeah. Well, I do feel a sort of wayfinding moment coming on for myself. I'm really excited. We have 100 educators coming to the Omega Institute in August to train with us, which I'm just like, those weeks on retreat are just like the highlight of the work for me always. I also love being in deep writing mode, but that is not the mode for right now. So I'm very, very jazzed about that. And I am, part of putting this work into a book and helping the book, jaunt out into the world is also to just see what comes back. And so I think some of this will be a process of discovery of what about this work, now that it is more broadly accessible, what resonates for people, what kind of collaborations crop up, what is feeling, generative. So I'm excited to, maybe have some orienting via incoming. It could be cool. It could be cool.
Okay, we're going to take a few more questions. If you could start there, and then we'll go back and forth.
Hi, I'm Jason. I'm a environmental lawyer and direct the climate program at a NGO in town, and I've also taught animal law over at the law school. And I first just want to say I so loved the All You Can Save book and the quote at the beginning, the poem by Adrienne Rich about my heart is moved by all we cannot save has been a mantra for me. I give that book away all the time to people that I work with. I'm curious to what extent this book has been influenced at all by Joanna Macy, who I've studied a bit, and her work on the work that reconnects and the Great Turning. And you mentioned Sister True Dedication and some of the thoughts that I've had around Buddhism and non-attachment, about whether the way forward, which I've struggled with a lot, as I've seen opportunities for success in law and policy kind of evaporate in the last few years, to what degree we have to kind of give up our notions of what saving the world looked like in order to move into that, whatever that next phase of transformation is.
Hi, Dr. Wilkinson. My name is Chess Jacobs. I'm a writer and developing environmental social scientist, and I'm starting my PhD in sociology at UMD College Park this fall. And
Congrats.
Thank you. My foundational research question essentially asks about the relationship between masculinity and the climate crisis. So I'm curious from, yes, lots of findings in the research.
Only exclusively in the research. Yes.
Yeah, right, only exclusively. But my foundational question, I guess, for you would be, what have you seen and how have you seen men specifically, I'm exploring cisgendered heterosexual men, how have you seen them experience climate wayfinding? Just by looking at the photo, I saw a lot of feminine presenting people there, right? And so my research is really going down this rabbit hole, asking the question, are men who are environmentalists inherently healthier human beings, right? And so when I think about,
Talk about good
get into the
questions.
research, yes. So I'm curious for you, like, what have you seen in terms of like men doing their own climate wayfinding, and what are like some of the challenges or wins you might have seen and what works for them?
These are very good questions, but we're running out of time, so I'm going to take the other questions now, and then I'm going to let you answer
Okay.
the men. Yes, I like how the men have also lined up.
We have
very
Joanna
quickly.
Macy. We have the men.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh,
yeah.
Hi, my name is Adam. I'm an AU alum over a decade ago, and for the last decade I've been in solar. You mentioned you started with a poem with the video. We saw a little haiku, all the acclaimed poets in the work. I was curious, and you mentioned a little bit about the values of poetry, but to you, what does poetry offer climate?
Oh, great question. And final question, yeah.
Hi, Catherine, and hi, everyone. My name is Neha. I'm a climate justice advocate and a poet and a visual artist who also happens to be a daughter of global majority and a first-generation immigrant in this time, in this city, and this country. I want to thank you. I know this is the very first event you are doing, so what a gift it is for us. My question is related to something Namal and I, we are dear friends. We are weaving together for the DC Climate Week, which is coming up. We have our first event starting this weekend. How, in your experience, I feel we live in such a binary world and binary manifestation of the world, grief and joy, us versus them, local versus global. How are you experiencing both in your own body, mind, and being, and in the world, in this work, the wholeness and transcending that false binary? How do you hold such profound, deep, raging grief and also ecstatic hope and beauty at the same time? And of course, it's a life's work, but would love to hear in this moment, how are you being with that? Thank you.
Thank you. Incredible questions.
Okay, I'm gonna go backwards.
Inspirations, men, poetry, and then
yes.
holding the binaries.
Neha, I love that question, and I feel like I'm at it every day, really. There's a monthly circle that I'm part of in Atlanta, which is not climate related, but it has been a critical support for me as a climate person. And one of the things we've been working with this last month is around transmuting fear at this time where fear is so high. And one of the things that was like a huge unlock for me is that there are a lot of emotions that we give voice to, rage, grief. I was like, I don't voice fear, really. Like, what is fear? We did this kind of wild sounding experience around fear. And it was just a reminder to me about like, get the body involved. Like the body knows how to help, and to move some of these things through so that the transmuting actually becomes possible. Just one little recent thing for me. Jason, it's nice to see you in person. I've seen you in the interwebs for a long time. And thank you for this question. I never had a chance to study with Joanna. I've read her work. I think of this body of work as deeply kindred and kind of in this, I don't know, wider canon. And the giving up of the frames that we've held around what it looks like to do this work or to do it well, yes. I feel that so much. In particular, because there have been times I have like charged down a path and found myself like, oh no, this is not the path. Either it's not the path for me, or this actually doesn't feel like a generative direction for change, or something in the world has shifted and now this is no longer. So I think that's a huge part of this. Tell me your name one more time. Chess. I love that you're doing this research. I can't wait to follow your PhD. Yeah, it's funny. On our team, a lot of the times we're like, oh God, we can't get any dudes in here. But as you did see evidence of in the photos, some intrepid man souls have joined us. And sometimes they're really funny parts. Like there was a guy at one of these who was like, are we at some point going to be able to have a session where we debate the word solutions? And I was like, no, we're not, because we just have to have a word to talk about the things that could meaningfully help. And that's the word we've chosen as a society. So we're going to just move along. And what's been really cool is that a lot of them have become like the mega facilitators. Like once they're in, they're so jazzed. Their students are like, this is the best class I've ever taken. You know, it's like, and then, you know, they're kind of off to the races. But it's been hard again this year. We, and part of that may be related to the legacy of All We Can Save as an anthology of women's writings. And, you know, I think there's just some of the challenges of the skills that people tend to grow because of the way gender operates in our society. Yeah. And your name, Adam. Man, poetry. I just love it. Actually, one of the things I'm hoping to do, Leah Naomi Green, who's an amazing environmental poet, was at the Outdoor Academy with me in high school, and we've reconnected, and we're scheming about a climate wayfinding meets poetry writing experience, which I think would be so fun. Maybe rather than saying too much about poetry, maybe I should just read a poem to be our our ending. I did not write any of the poems in this book, which makes them better. But I love this one. This is Equinox by Tamiko Beyer. Dear child of the near future, here is what I know. Hawks soar on the updraft, and sparrows always return to the seed source until they spot the circling hawk. Then they disappear for days and return, a full flock, ready. I think we all have the power to do what we must to survive. One day, I hope to set a table, invite you to draw up a chair, green steaming garlic, slices of bread still warm, honey flecked with wax, and a pitcher of clear water. Sustenance for acts of survival, for incantations stirring across our tongues. Can we climb out of this greedy mouth, disappear, and then return in force? My stars are tucked in my pocket, ready for battle. If we flood the streets with salt water, we can flood the sky with wings.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Catherine, so much for being so open and porous and generous and full of joy for us today. It means the world. The mission of our department here is, the defense and care for life on Earth, which was very much inspired by All We Can Save. It was very much inspired by the movement. Know that you have a home here and that we're all trying to make it real as an important part of international service. I want to invite everybody to stay here. We have lovely refreshments and drinks outside, and to engage with our speaker and to engage with each other some more. So thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Lauren.